I could move to pass the minutes, accept them, move to accept.
Yes, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No, carried. Okay, Margot Doring is here from the Historic District Commission. I don't know if you know the history of this committee, but we've been meeting for about I think this is our 5th meeting. And we're created by the council back in April or so. And our task is to review public art, but it's sort of broader than that. And we've been sort of exploring ways that we can interact with existing entities and organizations within the city government. And we have had conversations with city staff principally about that. And the HDC, comes in contact with art as part of their review. Although I did look at the ordinance, and it does specifically exempt art and sculpture from review. But I think by practice, it probably hasn't. And so we would like to get your feedback about what kinds of things you've experienced in reviewing public art and how you handle it, and whether or not there's any role that we could play in that process.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Margot Doring. I'm the vice chair. I did consult with members of the commission before attending the meeting, not knowing exactly what you were going to ask me, but I did go through some things. You are correct that we have run into circumstances where we've been asked to evaluate or approve a project that has an art component to it. Sometimes and often it's sculpture, but it has included questions about the painted signs on Tuscan Market, right on Market Square, things that fell into a very gray area. And that has caused us consternation, not having exact guidance on what we should or shouldn't do. Generally speaking, what the members of the HDC feel our role should be is sort of three of the following. The first is that we would endeavor that the art, if it represent something historical, a person, an event, a part of Portsmouth history, that it be well researched and accurate, not that it's some fanciful idea of what Portsmouth may or may not have been in the past. For example, we're a cod fishing area. We're not a whaling area. We built certain types of ships here. There are some types of ships we didn't build here. So those sorts of things. So that would be number one. The second is that our evaluation of art would fall into the same sort of guidelines that we use for evaluating buildings. So we would look at the mass of whatever it is, the context in which it falls in the neighborhood. How is it relevant, or the scale relevant to nearby buildings or other parts of the neighborhood, which is how we look at buildings when they arrive in front of us to begin with. So working off of some of our same criteria and endeavoring to apply that to art. The third item was a request that if the art is going to be installed on a building, whether it's a new building or an old building, that it be easily removed and be a material that's not going to cause damage or permanent damage to the structure, particularly in the case of older buildings. A newer building at some point will become old. So just always something to keep in mind.
Right.
So those were the three major themes that came up in my discussions with the commission. Questions of whether we should opine, is this good art? Is it pretty art? Is it beautiful art? Is it controversial art? Is it, does it say anything in particular? Is it politically charged? We really didn't feel that that was the purview of the HDC. We don't use those sorts of criteria when we evaluate a building project. So would we use that in discussing art? And I don't think any of us are art historians or
Right.
art majors in college or anything like that. So that was sort of the sum of what I got from my discussions with my fellow commissioners. Does that assist you in any way?
Right.
It's amazingly concise.
The question, so Margot, how do people square that with what it says in the ordinance?
With regard to,
Well,
It basically exempts our
Any
art
public art
and
from
structure
review.
and sculpture
That-
from review.
that's kind of where we
Yeah,
want to start. to sort of
I guess the question is, what is public art? Because the art that we generally review is not being paid for by the public. It's being paid for by the developer.
Actually,
or
it doesn't
somebody.
say public
It
art.
doesn't say, it
No.
just says art.
It just says, I was, it says artwork, sculpture and other similar exterior decor.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
I would say at this point that we deferred to Nick Cracknell
Okay,
as the king of the interpretation of ordinance. And
Yeah.
if he told us that we were, that it fell under our purview and that we needed to opine, then that's what we did.
Yeah.
Because we are not the experts at interpreting a city ordinance, and
Right.
that was sort of his purview.
Right.
and of course, until now, there really hasn't been any other body that would approve it, so.
Right.
No, I do recall that when Art Speak was an active committee, sometimes the HDC would say, well, what did Art Speak think? But
Mhm,
that was not during the time that I've been on the commission.
mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess one question that, when we talked to Peter Britz about this, the way the Conservation Commission works vis-a-vis the planning board, where the Conservation Commission gives a recommendation to the planning board. The Conservation Commission isn't the final word on something, but when a building is being built near a wetland,
Mhm.
Conservation reviews it, gives a recommendation one way or another, and we were thinking that that might be a route that would work with HTC. I don't know what you think about that, Margot.
I think that members of the HDC would welcome an opinion from a body that is more learned in art and has a better background for interpreting it, to say, yes, we think this piece is appropriate, and then we can apply the criteria that I've just mentioned.
Mhm,
For example, maybe the art is something, a sculpture that you all think is fantastic, wonderful, and fits all the criteria. But when we take a look at the mass of it, it's too small or too large for the space.
mhm.
And we might recommend that it be altered in some way to accommodate
So,
that.
so have you ever been asked to either accept or, issue a certificate of appropriateness for a piece of art, or alternatively turn it down?
So for example, the Brick Market.
Yeah.
McNabb's project
Mhm.
on Penn Hollow. The sculpture that's in the interior courtyard,
Mhm.
the fountain, Ruth
wave.
Bader Ginsburg, the waved wall, and there's an installation that still is not there yet. That was put forward to us as something that we needed to opine on, and we did.
Mhm.
So you actually approved that?
I would have
Or
to
was
say
it just
it
part of
was-
the larger?
It was
Certificate of
certainly-
of
it was part of the
appropriateness.
larger project, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It was considered part of the project, yeah.
Mhm.
Do you feel that you could have said, we feel that that's out of scale or it's inappropriate, and turn it down?
I think that the commission struggled with the question of, are we approving this art because it's good art, or are we approving this art because it fits into our criteria?
Right.
And up until this point, we haven't really been told
Mhm.
whether we should be simply applying our criteria or whether we should be looking at art with different eyes.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so I think as a default, the commission tended to fall back on, well, does it fit into our criteria as a piece of building
Right.
appurtenance?
Mhm. Yep. Okay. So the other one that I gathered that caused some consternation was the mural that's on the side of the building on Court Street. Was that part of your review or was that?
We're talking about the one that's historic, as a historic
You're talking
figure.
about the Ruth Blay?
Yes,
Okay.
right.
That was discussed, and I think it was part of the overall building plan. Our questions were around the material and how the material would affect the building. But we felt that as a project, as a public contribution to the education, we thought that was a wonderful concept, a wonderful idea. We didn't opine on whether the actual painting or depiction of the
Mhm.
person was a good one or
Right.
not. It was
So,
important that
you know,
the narrative be
you know,
accurate.
And I know that, at least I understand that part of the issue was that it had, a message on it. And was it a sign?
That was not part of the discussion at the HTC because that discussion happened within the planning department before it came to
Yeah,
us.
got it. Okay.
Mhm.
I believe a similar question came up with,
So have you run into this issue frequently, or is it a relatively rare issue?
I would say it's relatively rare.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We probably get a few in a row and then we'll get none for a long period of
Mhm.
time.
Right, right.
It just depends on what's being worked on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It probably only applies to really larger projects, not necessarily.
Court Street project wasn't very large. It was, some minor exterior renovations.
Actually, it also occurs to me, if a building isn't being renovated, I'm thinking of the Shalimar wall, for example, mural. If the building isn't being renovated, would that have not come to you then? Would that have just been something that they did?
Well, the one instance that I can think of that might be similar is the wall at the corner of Chapel and State Street, which is now El Sol.
Right.
And when
that's
it
right.
was
Mr. Kim.
yes,
yeah.
when it was a wonderful Asian dragon scene, I think that was considered artwork that was almost more like it was painting. It
Yeah.
wasn't a sign, it wasn't sculpture. And I don't believe we made any opinion on that one. That was
Okay.
not indicated as part
Okay.
of our purview. We do not have a purview over paint, only permanent materials. So the color of a permanent thing like shingles or some kind of like a brownstone material or a color of a slate. Those sorts of things we do have say over, but if it's paint, we don't.
Right. I'm familiar with that, why that was there.
I think the challenging one here, because we would look we are looking at criteria. We have a set of criteria that kind of amalgamate some of the percent for art criteria and others, which we'll be reviewing next week. And certainly mass and context would be part of any review that, any public art committee would do. The other two, maybe less so. So, would it have to be easily removed? As you said, paint, depending on how you feel about brick and how the brick was treated, it is or is not easily removed. That might be something we would look at from a maintenance point of view. That would be part of criteria that we would use as well. The first one, though, is an interesting one, I think. If it's historical, is it well researched and accurate? And that's probably a more challenging one. I'm thinking, I was really for 10 years deeply involved in doing the African Burying Ground. And obviously there's a lot of historical aspect there, but then there's interpretation because of history not known.
Mhm.
And I can see that one is, compared to the other two criteria, which are pretty straightforward, that one really is open to interpretation. That's got to be a tough one.
I think it came up in some artwork recommended down at Martingale Wharf. And that was some of the artwork we felt was just fine, but there was this particular depiction of whaling. And there was some story about how somehow whaling was part of Portsmouth history. And while certainly we acknowledge it's part of New England history, it wasn't really something that happened out of this port. And there was concern by the commission that people who don't know Portsmouth, tourists and so on, would misunderstand or get a misperception of what the history of Portsmouth was based on seeing these depictions of whalers. So that it just seemed that was factually misleading, where interpretations of the unknown, how did this person actually live? You know, we run into that at the historic homes of Portsmouth all the
Sure.
time. You do lots of research, but do you know that person actually wore that gown?
Right. Right.
They wore
Our
a
most
similar.
beloved sculpture is a whale. It just, the whale in
Yeah.
Prescott Park, it just
Right.
reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Our most beloved by
Kids.
generations, kids, right?
Mostly kids.
And then there's the whale wall.
And I
Yeah,
think,
there's
I think
the-
that in
That
that
is no
case, it's
more.
True.
that particular sculpture is not endeavoring to
To show a story.
show a story
Yeah.
and I think that's where, if it's intended to represent the history, a story of Portsmouth, that it be accurate and well researched. If it's art, it's art. If it's art of the sea, if it's art of
The HDC further defined historical content. So that, because
Mhm.
that's a broad term in itself. So even if you have a discussion, as things come up in the discussion, that's going to be part of it. You know, the content that maybe could be included to give this committee more indication of what that means. You know, to get somebody, run them through a whole project, have them develop a final piece that's going to go in a historical area, and we think we're meeting that term historical content, and then we go to the HDC and you have a different, let's find out what it is now and include it into a broader definition of historical content. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure that I am following you.
So, well, historical content, this would be for anybody who played a significant role in our community. Would that have to be 50 years earlier, 100 years earlier? Supposing we found somebody, they have a historical content, but they were here 20 years ago.
Mhm.
Does that qualify as historical content? So if we had a sculpture that was made to honor somebody in the area, and we were putting it down as this has historical content, and we go, no, it's gonna be like, if you get an old truck, if it's 25 years old, you can put the antique plate on it. You know what I mean?
No, I see what you're saying. And
And that would just be just one of several different,
Mhm.
as we peel the onion back.
I think that whether it's recent history or ancient history, it should endeavor to be accurate.
Mhm.
We do know that history is often written by the conquerors, as they say, or the winners or whatever. And over time, we learn more and truths become revealed. And we attempt to rectify the stories that have been inaccurately told. We've done that for African American history. We've done that for Native American history, where one side of a story is told and the other side isn't revealed for a very, very long time. So I think encouraging accuracy, whether it's old information or new information, is important. In terms of what is historic, I like to point out that any one of the buildings that we consider to be part of the historic district today, at one point was new.
Of course.
And it was only 20 years old. And it was, oh, that new thing they just threw up down there, it's horrible. You know, it's like, why can't they do it the old way? And so every building at some point will reach an age where people will look back and say, oh, isn't that wonderful?
Remember that style.
Remember that style, exactly. You know, and I might be a little bit of an outlier on the HDC, that I do tend to value those newer buildings, just because I do feel, they will eventually be those old buildings. And if Frank Lloyd Wright's work had been torn down 20 years after it had been built, because it was that ugly modern stuff, we wouldn't have the gems that we have today. What we're going to say about which of the buildings in downtown Portsmouth today that are going to make that cut as being, oh, that's an iconic building of its time, I don't know. Who knows?
Mhm.
So I would say the important thing is, who was the figure, if it's a person? What was the event, if it was an event?
Mhm.
Why is it meaningful? Why do we want to memorialize it? And be accurate about it.
Right.
And how old it is, I don't think should really matter.
Mhm. Margot, do you think that, and I know I can't ask you to speak on behalf of the whole HDC, but so this is really you, Margot. Do you think a process would work that if a project with an art component like the Brick Market comes to the planning department, that the planning department would refer the art component part to this group, the park group, where we would do a review and provide our review to the HDC? I mean, do you think that would be, without trying to add layers, without trying to hold up a project, but that we would use criteria similar, but probably going a little bit beyond and maybe going a little bit different than your criteria, would then give an advisory opinion to the HDC? Do you see that as a?
I think that would be very welcome. It relieves from us who are not art experts question of, or the responsibility of opining on the quality of the art. And so I think that would be very welcome. Yes.
I think it would mean we would really need to do some thinking and work. Mara, I'm looking at you particularly on that first criteria, that if historical, it's well researched and accurate, and think of where that comes together with art. So
Right.
How we think about that. I mean, it would probably be worth some really good time to think about that.
Yeah, I think that's, but I'm so, as a historian, I so agree with the idea that to create a kind of false, inaccurate history is really doing everybody a disservice, especially, it's doing everyone a disservice. So I think that, that certainly in terms of referencing people or events or practices, you want to be sure that what you're doing, it's good that that's what you look at.
And it's, we often get a lot of historic information when a new building comes to us, a new project. For example, Brick Market, they did a lot of research on the buildings that used to sit there. And it makes some of the design choices for that building make a lot more sense if
Mhm.
you knew about the buildings that were
Mhm.
there previously. Unfortunately, I think we're the only ones who were told
Mhm.
about some of that. And I don't know if they plan to put something inside the building that explains about the art that was there before and why that informed some of the design choices that were made. I think people would understand the building a little bit better if they did, but that's up to them.
Mhm. Right.
Do other people have comments or questions that they would like to ask?
And Bob is on. Bob is on.
Bob?
Bob has joined us.
Hi there. I did just want to observe with an office right next to the Brick Market, I constantly engage people, on the sidewalk walking around, and they say, "What kind of building is this?" And I say, "It's a metaphor. It's a building, but before it's a building, it's a metaphor. It's a characterization of a story of this place over time and of the things that happened here." And doesn't make me a lot of friends, but it does. It does give it gives people pause that every building in Portsmouth is not essentially a direct derivative of a historical piece.
Right.
So that's so it's good. It's good cause for conversation and some laughs on curbside. I did have one question. Just the presumption is, well, it's not a presumption, but we're talking about basically the integrity of art in our public spaces or buildings or whatever that is a reference to some kind of historical precedent or person or thing, event, and all those different possibilities. And I really agree with that, that if it's going to be history, that we should do history right. The other question, however, is when does one depart from history and basically say, well, I'm going to be optimistic about the future and offer something in that regard. And, there are many contemporary artists who do work in a more, in a modern genre, the piece down at, that Terrence did down at the parking garage, some of those things that we've seen that have been recent things there, they tell a story, and the story might have a historic foundation, but the actual expression of it is in a contemporary form, contemporary materials,
Right.
and all that. And I do feel like that enriches our city to basically, the future dimension. And it is optimistic about the future. It's just interesting to me that Americans struggle so much with the contrast between new and old, whereas all you have to do is go to Montreal or Quebec City, and it's not that far away, and they do it beautifully, as if they do it in their sleep. Now, I know it's the result of a lot of work and just as much rigor as we ask of here, but some places just seem to be able to more seamlessly integrate the new and old, and other places just struggle. Anyways, just a few thoughts about that.
And I like to point out to people that if you stand in Market Square and you look at each building individually, some of them are really not much to speak of, but
Right.
it's the fabric that they create
Right.
that makes the town charming.
Mhm.
And when you don't allow for variation in the fabric, you end up with something quite boring.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
The several of you used the word tell a story, Bob, and I think it was Mara or Margot used explanation. And it occurred to me that when we think about history, we think more of the explanation. When we think about art, we tend to think it doesn't need an explanation. In the Burying Ground, when we were doing the Burying Ground, for some people on the committee and some people in the community, the figures at the end and even the figures at the head of the street, Mother Africa and the first slave, were too abstract. And the compromise was to put that little pedestal in the middle that tells the story. So,
Right.
there is that historical, an option to make sure that the history is accurate is an explanation that is somewhere near the piece, whereas with a piece of art, we wouldn't feel, if it's just art, we wouldn't feel maybe the need for an explanation.
Mhm.
I think, when we wrote our proposal, we talked about that a little bit and, I guess I'm trying to find the language in it that we used, and I'm not finding it right at this moment, but okay, so we're talking about expressiveness, and one of the things is, how much does the work express the intended purpose without explanation? And then, but we said, if there are written elements, how do they work with the visual elements? And I think that, when I think of, I do think of the African burial ground as a really good example where there is explanation, but it's really woven into the fabric of the piece so that it enhances it, but it doesn't make one stop and read and
I
not
gotta read it
experience the
first.
work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you're sitting with public work. You're not walking through a museum and you're not spending, 10 minutes, 5 minutes reading the wall text. which people tend to do too much anyway. I mean, you really want the work to grab people in some way, but then explanation is good. And then when you talk about, I happened to read something about that, about the building that you were referencing, where the history for, some article in which the history was referenced, and it actually, I can't articulate it back because I read it very quickly before the building was built, but it actually has informed, just even having read that informs my attitude towards it and how I see the food in a positive way. So, sometimes just a little bit is really useful. But on the other hand, you kind of look for something that is expressive without the lengthy explanation, because you really don't want people to have to read too much to experience it and be moved by it. So I don't know, we're working on, I mean, that's one of the things that we can continue discussing when we talk about criteria, but it seems like that's a meaningful.
Well, I think, thank you very much, Margot, for coming and sharing your views. And it's part of an ongoing process. We'll try to figure it all out.
Well, you're welcome. Very happy to help. And if there's anything else we can answer, please let us know. We really appreciate being involved in your process.
Just sort of one more question about procedure, and maybe Kate, this is something, let's say we wanted to put this process in place where the typical procedure became the planning department.
Right.
Flag something, referred it to us, then it went to you. Would it just be a matter of your rules and our rules, or do we think we need to memorialize that in some other way? And anybody have thoughts on that? Because I'm not sure. It feels like we'd want to do something more than just have like a gentleman's agreement, because we want to get something, a routine going.
May I suggest an exchange of letters between chairs of the Public Art Review Committee and the Historic District Commission? A letter to first introduce the Public Art Review Committee more thoroughly to the Historic District Commission and suggest some opportunities for review and process, and then kind of solidifying that back, whatever the Historic District Commission thinks is appropriate, back to public art. So starting that working relationship before we kind of put anything formally more in writing, because we want to see how it works, I think. But I think then also I'm happy to work with Sean and work with the city manager's office on what the planning department would need to do on the back end of that to make sure things were appropriately flagged.
I mean, I think my sense is that needs to be a dialogue here. We need to figure out what our role is first before we even begin to write the dialogue between us and another entity. But I think that that will come along. And
That sounds right.
I mean, if there is a project and it's coming in and starting to be introduced to HDC, and there's basically a discussion that there, is potentially a component of public art that is a part of, exterior installation within the project, then certainly that's an opportunity for that our methodology could sort of reflect the methodology that HDC goes through of, looking at context and gradually, starting more general and getting more specific.
Yeah.
Art can work in the same way. If it is that we want to have a process that reflects public interest and compatibility with other forms of reviews of projects and input, that I would certainly. I much prefer the model where we have the opportunity to engage with intention before we get to execution.
Yeah.
And I think that that's different, and that's a different question than the function of our work. When someone comes in and says, well, I want to do this, you know, and either you approve it or don't, and we get in an argument, or we don't, or we love it and think it's genius, or we think it's absolutely terrible. And to have grounds for being able to, you know, have some kind of objective methodology to which we can arrive upon that more than just a good taste test. So I think that we will have multiple avenues through which we consider our work as a whole that are going to be sort of uniquely tailored to the different moment when we have the opportunity to give advice and feedback, and, you know, or pound our fist on the table.
You.
I promise I won't do that very much.
Thank you again for.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Do you need a letter of approval for Izzy's good behavior?
Yeah, really.
Oh,
Yes, I'm very comfortable here.
I'm very.
Thank you very
comfortable.
much.
It's nice and cool here.
It's nap time. It's a-
Okay, the next item on the agenda is discussion with a representative of Portsmouth 400 Sculpture Subcommittee about the donation of a bell. Ernie Greenslade, I guess you're gonna. Why don't you all come up to the table?
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh. I'm like literally at the head of the table. Sorry. Hello, everybody. I'm Ernie Greenslade, and thank you for having us here. And also with me are Nancy London and Judy Miller. And we are the P&H 400 Legacy Committee, Legacy Subcommittee. And just to give you a little background, we were tasked with finding a project that would be appropriate to celebrate, you know, the 400th anniversary. And we started out, I can't remember, it was quite a while ago, and there had been a bunch of public forums. So we kind of sifted through those to see what kind of ideas were coming up to the top. And then we took some of those ideas and talked to people in the community and talked to the city. And what it kind of led us to is a sculpture garden in the Bohanko Gateway Park. You talking to the microphone. Oh, this, I mean, oh. you have a nice loud voice, but just because
Yeah.
we're recording. Okay, Thank you. okay,
Good.
great. So that kind of the consensus was that this would be a great way to, you know, to do a project that would help us remember the 400th anniversary for many years to come. And we liked the idea of making it a maritime themed sculpture garden, because that would give us, you know, an opportunity to highlight our rich maritime history. And also the city had already invested a lot in the Gateway Park. And so it was just kind of a nice collaboration. So that was the decision, and everybody was on board with that. And then so we set up a review team to we sent out a request for proposals, and we set up a review team. And the review team included, was chaired by Barbara Masser, because Barbara Masser from Pro Portsmouth is also on our board, I mean, on our subcommittee, and she's kind of been leading the review team. But we had a really great review team. we had Leah Woods, a professor at UNH. We had Nancy Carmer, former economic development director, who was, as you know, probably very involved in public art projects in the city. We had Tom Watson, who's a retired attorney and very involved with the Prescott Park Master Plan. We had, did I say Elizabeth Farish, the head curator at Strawberry Bank, and Lenny Mullaney, a local artist. And we sent out the request for proposals. We anticipated that we would get a local artist. We went to the last year's New Hampshire Craftsman Fair, talked to every public art, every sculptor there. We visited just about every sculpture garden in New Hampshire and took names. And so when we sent out the RFP, we really focused on local. But lo and behold, we ended up getting proposals. We got over 40 proposals, and we got them from all over the world. So it took off. We had sent it to New England groups, but it took off, which it was exciting. And the committee carefully reviewed all the proposals. They had a list of criteria, and they were unanimous in selecting Sijia Chen, who is a artist from Los Angeles, originally from China, from a small waterfront town in China that she thinks is very similar to Portsmouth. And they were unanimous in selecting her. It's a really, so you can see the concept here, but it's 20 foot, inspired by Gundalo sails. But I think what really excited the review team was the community engagement portion of her concept. She spent a month meeting she came here and met face to face with she had a public meeting at the library. She met with all kinds of groups within Portsmouth. And then there was also an online component. And the goal was to find out from the community what represented Portsmouth's maritime history. Because her plan, she's a paper cut artist. Her father was a paper cut artist in China. And she was going to incorporate those themes into paper cuts in the design. So we got that all approved. And now we're just working on the hard part, the site preparation and all of that, which is a struggle. But we hope to have this piece installed the end of October. We hope, but I don't know. We're going to do our best.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of new to all of this. So, we'll just see what happens. So I don't know if anybody had any questions on that, or because I was going to talk next about the next aspect of this, which is what I really wanted to bring to this group, is we've been fundraising for this, and we've done pretty well. The three of us, we applied for grants. We, approached individuals, two of whom are sitting here. Thank you to the Thorisons and Chris Dwyer for contributing. And so we received a very generous grant from the Sawtell Foundation. And I don't know if you're aware of Joe Sawtell. He was a developer in Portsmouth, and he was also a collector of maritime artifacts. And his goal was to build a maritime history museum right near the Albacore. And he actually they had the foundation poured, but he died suddenly 20 years ago. So he was just, I didn't know him, but he was, I think the major force, and Bob, you may know better, but the major force behind the Albacore.
Right.
Oh,
And
Oh, yes, he was.
yeah. And
The museum, the Maritime Museum that he wanted to have was actually on that site or adjacent to that site of the Albacore.
yeah.
And it never came to fruition, obviously, but that's where it was slated to go.
So we reached out to them, and I was more thinking maybe they might have some artifacts left that we could incorporate into a piece. Because, and I should say this, so Siege's piece will be kind of the signature piece. It's 20 feet by 15 feet. So you'll be able to see it from, you know, as you come the gateway into the city, you know, from afar.
Ernie, on the map that's there, could you tell us about where that's going to be
Yeah.
sited, just so we get that?
So that is not completely decided yet
Okay.
because they're working on the site prep. There are 3 potential locations. And I've got this piece here with more towards, I guess it's the western end of the park. I can pass.
Do you mean
Okay.
closer to
Oh, that would be great.
95? When you say western, closer to Route 95, is that what you mean?
Yes.
So
Let's see, where are we?
where Market Street is and where it says new crosswalk there, that's kind of where the pavilion is.
Yes,
Okay.
And it's gonna be between the pavilion and Market Street. Kind of where that, where the P is
oh,
in that vicinity.
Okay, so
so it's to the left of the, of the pavilion that exists there now.
got it.
So you.
So if I was coming off the
Before the-
bridge, it
before
would be the
village
first
goes
thing I would
into
see.
town.
Before what?
It's before the pavilion coming into town,
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
the city.
That's probably where it's gonna be.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Depending on the site, you know, they're doing all, I mean, I had no idea what was involved in, you know, the site preparation. So anyhow, we were kind of surprised by the really generous donation from the Sawtells, because really what I was hoping to talk to them about is, do they have anything that we might be able to incorporate? Well, we did talk about that, and they have this, I sent you the picture of the bell, the Sagamore bell. And they are willing to give that to us. And it was a bell that was made for the Sagamore, a ship that was built at the Portsmouth, in the Portsmouth shipyard in 1857. And I think we also sent you, here's a whole description of it. You know, it was for Portsmouth merchants. It's just like a really, really kind of cool history. And so we had a, I can pass this around if you think that would be helpful. I've got it marked.
Sure. How large is the bell?
It's about 15 inches by 15 inches. It is
So it's
heavy. I don't know how.
relatively small.
Yeah, it's not real, it's not real big. It's heavy. Right now, we've been working on getting it appraised, which hasn't been easy, but I got someone through Strawberry Bank Andrew Jacobson, who I think he said he thinks he can do at the end of August, and he thinks he'll be able to donate it. So that's great, because we need to get the appraisal so we can make the donation to the city. So then we talked so we had a $10,000 Rockingham County ARPA grant that we needed to use for a Rockingham County artist. So we were talking to, and we thought, wow, I wonder if there's something they could do with the bell, create like a structure for the bell. And so we talked to Terrence Parker, and he's very excited about this. And he would like to collaborate with Peter Hapney, blacksmith. And also, I think it's Jeff Bolster, who's a maritime historian.
Right.
And create something. Their idea is like almost like something like how it would have hung on the ship that it was built for. I had hoped to have a rough concept for that tonight, but Terrence was really, he didn't get a chance to get to it. So he's going to have it for me in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be really rough because we don't know whether it's going to be hanging in the pavilion. You know, is there some way it could hang in the pavilion, or would it be a freestanding structure? So
Right.
we're just trying to figure that all out. But we just saw this as an opportunity to add another piece to the sculpture garden. And, you know, it was just fit kind of neatly with the grant we had that couldn't go to Siege's piece. So that is kind of where we are with that. And I just wanted to share that with you. I think I talked with Chris, and she kind of thought it would be a good kind of trial run for this.
Criteria.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for what you're doing, and you could kind of use it as a model. I mean, our plan is to take the donation to the city council, and I wanted to talk to you and find out, do we need we probably need the appraisal before it goes to the city council. So, so that's, we're gonna have to postpone that, but that's, we'll work it all out.
Question I have, for your committee, is this going to be a bell that actually rings?
Well, that's a couple of, so the donor said, wouldn't that be cool if it could actually ring?
Right.
And then Terrence said, not knowing that would be so cool if it could actually ring.
Right.
So that's something that's been discussed and really, I think people are excited about, but it still has to be explored. Like, they haven't even seen the bell yet.
Right.
The bell is at her home, and, we need to get it appraised. We need to get the insurance. And I've reached out to Karen Connard and Suzanne and Peter Rice and told them what we're planning, and they
Right.
gave us their approval to, move forward with it, not their blanket approval, but they said, I think it sounds like a good plan. But, the thought is, when we take it here and kind of, get your thoughts. The other thing that I kind of struggle is, like sighting in the park and where we're going to put things. I mean, if we could get some help with that, feedback from this group, because, I think we have a great, a lot of great experience and knowledge here. So that would be really helpful.
That may be a site review at some point, even though we can look at a map.
Right.
But I
Oh,
think-
definitely.
I think we definitely want to make
Definitely.
it so.
Yeah.
Once we see that this is going to be, and I'm sure they're going to put in a structural foundation for it. So that will delineate that area. And then I think it's just a matter of trying to map out visually. What else would be going there? Like, for instance,
Exactly.
this bell, I could see, I do know Peter Happney. I used to do timber framing. I could see this bell in a timber frame stand.
Mhm.
Peter Happney wrapping the timber frames with strappings to match the bell, have the bell so it's actually can ring. You could even possibly do the bell so it's on a slight fulcrum, and it almost has a balancing point on it and rings. But anyway, that's for your committee. to
Yeah.
bring
It's
To-
exciting.
to
Yeah.
us, but
Yeah.
yeah, I see that. If I went to that park, I see that bell, it's like, I'm a kid, I'm gonna go try to ring it.
That's, yeah.
Wait a minute, if I don't have some, maybe, hey, well, try that. Anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
And we really see this as an opportunity too, for
Especially for the
educational,
kids,
like
especially.
we'll have a link to a website where you can get information on the shipbuilding in New Hampshire and the ship that this was on, you can get information on the maritime history. So,
Right.
information on Siege's Peace and all of the different themes in there.
sure.
Because, it's almost like it's fun to kind of look at it, Siege's design, and pick it
Oh,
out.
I would see how that bell was hung on the ship
Mhm.
and the type of structure it was done, because that has to be documented. And see if that structure
Give some
itself could be
ideas.
applied to a
Mhm.
freeform standing thing that, somebody could go over and ding that
Mhm.
bell.
And I think that's the same direction Terrence is going in.
Yeah, good. What's that?
And,
Boys, right?
Yeah.
we did talk, we have to talk about security.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this bell was $10,000 when he purchased it 30 years ago, but then in my research, I've heard that some of these things have gone down significantly. So who knows what the value of it is, but the security of the bell and also safety, we'll
Right.
have to take into
Absolutely.
consideration.
I think those are important issues to
Yeah,
address.
those are our key issues with all of this that we
Yeah.
have to keep in mind.
So once it's given to the city and the city accepts it, I think the idea is then the referral would be to this committee. And we could use our criteria that Mara and Jen have developed as, we could use this as a
Right.
test case to work our way through criteria and say, what would we recommend?
Yeah.
Just the kind of things you've been starting to say.
I guess this is raising a bigger question that I have about a discussion we're not having tonight about criteria, but about procurement and how the artist is being selected. I understand there's a grant, but that won't pay for the whole piece. And so if you've gone through a competitive selection process for one piece, but for another piece, it's a different process and it's city funds who will eventually.
It's not city.
It's not city funds.
It's not
Well, that's
city
what-
funds.
Yeah.
question then.
See,
If it's not
because
city
this is the
funds,
five,
then why
because
is
P and H 400 is a 501c3.
It's
So
a
that's,
gray, it's very gray.
so
Right.
that's why we could raise money for that. And also get grants, we got a, grant for the Fuller Foundation, we got the Sawtell Foundation grant, we got the ARPA grant. Any other grants? But because we're a 501c3 and it's going to us, like the city couldn't.
But it's city land. I mean, just a lot of these questions are not.
They
Yeah.
are, they're
I
very
think they
gray.
need,
Yeah, they're very
need to be addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's why Ernie is in touch with Karen and the city attorney has been very involved in every single step of
Yeah.
this
Kate's
entire
got-
process.
Kate's got.
Yeah, she did that. She really did the contract and the RFP. And yeah, we're partnering with them on this.
Yeah.
But it's, that's the other thing. You've got to think there's room for 6 to 8 pieces here. And this committee can kind of, because, PNH 400 is going to phase out soon after 2023.
Yeah.
So also I think it's good in working with this committee, moving forward, how is it gonna?
Kate,
Sorry.
do you have a question?
I was just going to add something from
Okay,
the
sure.
city side of things and the city council side of things. I think it's important to note that when we drafted the Public Art Review Committee ordinance, we did that so that the Public Art Review Committee could accept donations of art pieces, which is really what this is. It's not funds that this committee then is going to decide how the what the art piece looks like. They're inviting assistance. But it's really a donation of an intact piece of art, and we have to think of it that way. And so because they're not a city entity, they don't have to go through the same processes we do. And anyone who donated a piece of art to the city wouldn't go through that same process. Now, then there's a different level of criteria that we need on accepting
Mhm.
a piece of art. And I think that that's where this committee really comes into play is, do you accept this work of art? And do you accept the citing?
Do we
location?
recommend, do we recommend the city accept it? Is that
Exactly,
the-
because the council ultimately makes that vote,
Right.
but the council would want an opinion from this
It
committee.
sounds to me like that decision's already been made. Is that
It
correct?
has not at the council level.
Okay.
What their discussions have to take place with the staff clearly
Got it,
first
got it.
about
Okay,
whether or not something is even feasible. And
Right.
so,
Understand.
and then if it is, then it can come to the council.
Yeah.
But I think the council would want a recommendation from Public Art
Right.
Review.
Nancy?
I just wanted to your point, Alyssa, about privately funded art on public property. We do have a process and a precedent for that with the Music Hall Arch.
Oh, good.
And the reason why I think it's important to clarify that is because it sort of absolves the nonprofit. I mean, you can raise the money and do all the fun stuff, but then what this committee does is essentially replace the rule that ArtSpeak did, which is use the city's own accepted public policy on art and evaluation to then accept the art through the criteria that the city has already accepted before we change it or modify it. And that is the public part of making sure things are safe and, all of that, and kosher,
Mhm.
above water.
This discussion and the last discussion make me think that because it's Portsmouth, because we're 400 years old, because we have so many people who care about history, we need to think a little differently than some community. We may have some different wording within our criteria that is related to where history and art come together. And, what art is in a historical context. We need to think about that more than it might be in just anybody else's community, because I think this will happen a lot, the examples that Margot gave, and now this example, some people might say, why is this bell coming to the Public Art Committee? None of us are saying that, because I think we have an intuition of how it's going to be used and what it is. But I think we need to work on clarifying and getting some good examples and definition. That's one thing. And then a second thing, something, Paul, that you said, one of our tasks that we do need to add to our list is to look at that whole park and begin to think about placement and scale and all of that. So a field trip in our future.
I think that's right.
Can I ask what's driving that now? Like in terms of you've got several sites and consideration, and what is driving the ultimate decision about where to place this piece?
Well, I think with the signature piece, Segis piece, they came and visited and felt that would be a good spot for it.
The artist.
Yes, yeah,
Working with Public Works
yeah.
in terms of what's a viable location.
Had we
So
been
is
in
the
place
artist in
though,
Public Works.
yeah, had this committee been in place at the time, we probably would have been the ones to kind of work with your committee to figure
Right.
out where.
How many other pieces does your
Public
committee
Works,
think
just said
the park could have?
So Peter Rice thinks the park could fit 6 to 8 pieces.
Depending on the scale and how
Yes,
the location
that's what
gets
he said
navigated.
originally, but that may be something, I don't know, that you could weigh in on. Wouldn't it be a nice problem if you had too many?
Well, it seems to me too, not only the placement of the sculptures, but how the rest of that park is landscaped is also as much of an art form
Sure.
as the sculpture is going to be.
Right.
One's
Really
going to
important.
enhance the other. The landscaping is going to give intimacy gradation. People are going to say, well, this is a nice cozy spot to sit down and look at that beautiful sculpture. Looks just like the gondola sail.
Mhm.
So, I think as we look at the individual pieces or your committee starts to pick out different possibilities, that should also be tagged in with the whole landscape plan. A whole site plan should be developed.
I know you're saying your committee, but after a few months from now, that's our committee.
Will go away. Here.
Where you
Oh.
go?
And won't have
Is it gonna be sunny?
So the hope is that somebody, whether it's this committee or a subcommittee of your committee, will take on additional fundraising goals.
Yeah.
And that so that those additional 5 to 7 sculptures can at some point be installed. in the
Yeah.
park.
Right.
Um,
So has there been any discussion about where this bell might be located?
Well, we talked, I think some people like the idea of being in the pavilion, but we just don't know if
Okay.
we need to get some more information on the signage. There's a lot of signage going on too, that,
which we
you
looked
want to
at.
complement that. So, and maybe Sean, I don't know if you have any more information on that, but I think we're going to meet with Peter Rice, because there's signage, like there's outlines in the pavilion where they're going to put
Right.
some signage.
Some interpretive sign.
And then you have some of the like maritime history signs along
Mhm.
the water. And then we'll need signage for the pieces, the sculpture, so, and then we'll want, we need signage for the to recognize the donors. So there's a lot of things going on with that too. I mean, we're gonna ask if the donor signage can maybe be incorporated to what's in the pavilion, but
Sure.
we haven't met with,
Yeah.
I mean, we've been working closely with Peter the whole, you
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
but we have some specific questions that we're
Mhm.
making a list to meet with him.
Ernie, I wonder if people think if that might be a joint meeting. So Peter doesn't, it feels like if we're gonna, we need to have an understanding also of where those other signs are gonna be, what they look like. So maybe we could do that jointly. Or at least
Or
some
at least a
subcommittee of
some
this.
representatives, yeah.
Yeah, that might be,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I want to make that happen really soon
Yeah,
because we
sure.
need to get, we really need to get moving on the signage.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we, welcome that if a couple of people from
Sure.
this committee wanted to be there, or if I'm creating a list of questions we have, if I could share that with you, if you had
Sure.
other things that come to mind.
Maybe when you set up the meeting, you let Sean know when it is and we can see if people are available. We don't want a quorum to go. We just want a couple people to know what's happening.
I just wanted to
Also,
add,
Have you had any discussions, this bell probably for years and years and years has been inside in a museum-like setting. Has that been
Somebody's
discussed?
basement.
What?
In somebody's basement.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, it obviously was on a ship at one point, but the question is,
Yeah.
I share
Yeah.
your desire to have it ring, but it also, that could be a problem. You end up with a clapper that's missing eventually.
Yeah,
And.
or drive the
it's-
neighbors crazy.
What's that?
Drive the neighbors crazy.
Right, right.
I just
But-
wanted to add here that everybody on this committee should understand that the landscaping has been completed in that park already. So they landscaped it, or that contract was, I think, 3 years ago, or now it's almost 4 years ago. And so the landscaping isn't fully grown. So you have to think about what is the landscaping going to look like in the long run when you're installing any piece in this
Good
space,
point.
because you don't want trees then blocking viewpoints. So
Good.
I drove by it the other day and I did notice that there's a lot of volunteer trees and sumac and a bunch of other stuff that's starting to grow up
Sumac's
along
coming
the
back.
edge.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this is fun.
Yes.
Yeah, we're very passionate about this, and I don't want to, speak for anybody else, but I still, happy to be involved in some way after this year, if I can be helpful, and because we're just, we're really put a lot into this, and we're really excited about creating a really memorable gateway to the city,
Yeah.
and also a park where people, that will be educational. You can have, some programs out there, and we're excited about it.
Right.
Did a good job. I think that's fabulous myself.
CJ is so lovely. I hope,
Right.
so she'll be back, and I'd love to bring her in to meet with this
Oh,
group.
nice.
I mean, she met with everybody in Portsmouth, but you weren't formed yet. So,
Yeah.
but she is so lovely and so accomplished, and such a pleasure to work with her. Actually, one of the paper cut designs, where I said her father is a paper cut artist in China. He did one of the designs that's going to be in this.
Nice.
And also she has an exhibit in that was in China earlier this summer, and she included Portsmouth and details on this coming, like this project.
She has a pretty nice website. If you
Yes.
want to look at her, with a lot of her art that's already in.
Yeah, I can send that if people haven't sent her, she's lovely and so talented, and she's just such a pleasure to deal with. But yeah, you'll have a chance to meet her because she will be back in town.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernie.
Oh, thank you. This was
Thank you,
great.
Judy. Appreciate your coming and
Your hard
the
work.
presentation.
It's been fun. It's been exciting.
Yeah, it's great.
We're excited that this committee is here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're ready to take over.
Yeah. Don't
Everything's
scare
fun
me.
easier.
We'll probably be making. a
We'll
subcommittee,
see.
right?
And then it's
Yes.
just ending it. you know.
It's been a real learning
In
experience,
January,
but
subcommittees. They can join subcommittees.
Right, right.
Start.
probably
It's
a
continuity.
year and a few
True.
months.
Yeah.
You know, the RFP went out last fall. Because last year at
Okay,
this
it's been a
time,
year and a
Nancy and I were at the Craftsman, you know, the Sunapee League, New Hampshire Craftsman Fair, talking to, so that's when the RFP was just going out. And so we were talking to people and then it all blends.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Interesting. Yeah.
Number 5, the park web landing page and sculpture map. Anthony, you want to?
Sure.
Up to speed
So
on
last
that?
time we were here, we talked a little bit about, wouldn't it be nice if we had a place on the website? And we actually do. We already did. We did that day. I don't know if you want to show them.
So
Yes, what's our website?
to go to the website, so that's the map. right?
This is the map. Well, we can look at it afterward. So I met with, first I reached out to the city's communication director, Monty, with exactly what we discussed, the landing page, the potential to create an interactive map that this committee could populate, and a place to put all of our projects. And he replied to me right away. He said, you actually already have a landing page and I'm happy to populate it with anything that you want. We can get to that. And he and I met, and I told him how I was able to use Google Maps to make a sculpture map, interactive sculpture map at the Algonquin Museum of American Art when I worked up there. And so he used his city Gmail account and he just created a little map for us. And then we talked about, I told him, the first one I wanted to put up, I was in his office and we did the lions. And I went to the public art Instagram and Facebook pages, and I downloaded all the information and the photos from there. So they're iPhone photos. And so that's why the little kitty cat icons are there. And he said that we could make this customized. So if you hover over any cat, Sean, and click on it, go ahead, you'll see. So there's all the information. Cool. So you can do any of those cats. Those are the ones that I populated. And yeah. But I named him that. That doesn't come with a name. I did that. So, and then you see all the information. So the way we can customize this map is we can change out the cat and we can make it a different icon, of course. We can remove and screen off we
The
can
other
screen
stuff.
off businesses,
Right.
We could keep certain landmarks and remove others. And of course, if I can provide the link to anybody on this committee and anybody can populate it with public art. You can either go on the map and drop a pin, or you can be out in the world and geolocate yourself. So we can talk about that and I can give you a lesson. It's pretty easy to drop a pin on a Google map, but there's probably 5 times more works of art than what I just did this in a couple of hours when I had a fever a few weeks ago. So that's our interactive map. Yes.
Question though, the information, the little write-ups is just what you knew about it at the time?
So when I created the social media pages, I used a combination of information that from old ArtSpeak, documents, and what I could find on Wikipedia about the artists, and what I could find on old web pages about, for example, the Portsmouth Museum of Art street AKA street art, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of information out there, but I had to do a little digging. And I didn't put up any information that I didn't verify somewhere.
That's good.
So anything that is already photographed and has the wording for it, and actually on the public art, like there's this funky little maritime sculpture down at the Thomas Layton in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I could not find information on that. I put a call out on social media, like, does anybody know what this is? So there's some things that we don't know. Yeah, I didn't ask. I didn't try that hard. So anyway, so there's our map. Here
This is
is,
the
Wait, how do you get?
cultural plan subcommittee landing page.
so this is exactly what our page looks like. We have this exact page, but ours is not populated because we didn't give it. The only thing that's on our page is the information directly taken from our charter about public art. So Monty said that he recommended that we think about populating our page sort of in this way. So you saw, can you go back?
Sure.
There was 3 icons. On this page, it's the cultural plan and meeting minutes and questions. We can put anything we want there, whatever we think we want to have there. We write it up, we send it to Monty and CC Sean. That's the process that Monty wants. And then if you scroll down, this can be, you know how Mara, you and Jen kind of condensed all of this. This might be a good area for that. And then
What was
over on
done.
the right-hand side is the area where Monty suggested we put individual projects. And so anything that we have going on could kind of, people can learn more and go to, and they'd have their own pages.
Yeah.
So that's how he suggested we set it up. And he is happy to post anything we give him, but our job is to write it up and copy edit and make sure that everything we give him is accurate and well worded.
That's how it works with my other committees. You guys do the content.
Right.
And then
Right.
city will look at it and confirm and post.
So I had some notes here. He, so like that info that Ernie was just talking about,
Sure,
you know,
perfect
the
example.
info about the bell or the sales or whatever, you know, the map is a great place to put
Yeah.
that kind of info.
Yeah.
And people can look at it in real time.
Yeah.
So there's that. Monty also wanted,
We're right now, I think, the map is not on a page, it's just exists as a Google Doc. right
yes,
now.
Right.
Okay.
yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah, no, this isn't live or anything.
Yeah.
We have to decide what we want it to look like and when we want it to go live and who we want to populate it. And maybe it's a community thing, who knows? I
Yeah.
mean, that's a conversation. He did want us, and I had just one last comment, he wanted to make sure we were aware that the library is an excellent resource for information for many of our works indoors and some of our works outdoors, because as much as you can see outdoors, we have art and donations and
Yeah.
public art in public places indoors, in City Hall, in the library, like
Yeah.
all over the place. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot.
Yeah, so one thing might be, and I almost see this as 2 like task groups. One task group to just begin the list of what are all those things? And, you know, because over time we can chip away at getting the things up, but to make the list of things that we want to represent on the map. And it feels like another task group would maybe build out what should be on the webpage in the way that you started. I
Yeah.
mean, does that make sense to people that we would get those going?
Yeah.
Well, I gotta make those
I
notes.
mean,
Sorry.
I'm happy to volunteer to start the list, partly because Ellen and I, as we told you, did that Save Our Sculpture years ago with the Smithsonian.
Right.
And so we have some of those records. So maybe that's something Ellen and I could
Sure.
take
And I
on.
can work on the task committee, starting to frame out the content and
That would be great.
Absolutely.
great.
So we got
Great.
you and Ellen?
I'll ask Ellen about that.
Okay.
The list, and
Right.
we can start that list,
get
but I'm
together.
glad,
You and Alyssa?
yeah.
Okay.
And I think, and it's based on something Margot said, I want to make sure that we clarify to people that public art is not art that the public paid for,
Yeah, that was
but
a
it's
good
art
point.
that's accessible to the public.
Right.
Just so we have that clear. So then we're thinking of things in our schools and
That might be good on the landing page.
absolutely.
Yeah, some of these big definitions.
Yeah.
Little public art
Yeah, yeah.
definition.
What is,
Boom.
you know, yeah.
Good.
I'm not sure we've
Okay.
defined all of
I don't think we have yet, but we
So-
can draft some
Right.
things to the committee to consider.
Mhm.
So we're sort of running out of time, believe it or not.
Melissa
And-
had a question, if I may, Mr.
Yep.
Chair. About, are we meeting on the fourth Wednesday of every month? Or is it
Last.
the last Wednesday of every month?
I don't know. We
We had just
we
picked dates.
collectively picked those dates. I think
Yeah.
Right.
that they work for
Are
everyone.
they different
They
weeks?
could be different if you have a 5-week month, I think.
Yeah.
Thing. I thought, oh, well, if it's the 30th, that's not the 4th, that's the last. And so
Yeah.
just,
That was the question.
that's a question. And we can
That is a
decide
question.
month to month if we need to.
Yeah,
but it's
now we've
good to
got-
have that.
Well, I think we should get a routine. I think you're
Right.
right.
We've got two on the calendar now of August 30th and September 27th.
Yeah.
Are we,
They're both the last.
They're
Are
the
we-
last.
I think we did that because the room wasn't available. I also like, are we restricted on any of the third or fourth days?
I don't
We-
think so. I think that with this time frame, there on occasion, there'll be someone coming in at 7.
Yeah.
But if we're working this time frame, I think that gives us access.
Well, if we started with the last, maybe we should just
Yeah.
continue if that works.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
why
last
don't we do
Wednesday
that?
of the month?
Yeah.
December might be tricky. It's 2 days after
Oh, yeah. that'll
Christmas
be
if people
tricky.
celebrate.
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
but-
right.
Yes.
We might forego that month.
Yeah.
Because the next to
Um,
last is tricky too.
Yeah.
So next meeting, we're gonna focus on the
Right.
accepting public art, criteria for accepting public artworks. Also, Kate has made a referral to us.
I thought I should give everyone a heads up for a discussion for next month, not today.
Right.
But the city council voted, Monday night to refer the Love Locks, in Prescott Park, the segment of fence
Yeah.
to public art review for a recommendation back on whether or not it's a piece of art.
Right.
And if that determination is made, if it's determined that, yes, it is a piece of art, where should it go? It's not going to stay in its current space because of safety concerns. So where
Is
should
it
it
still
go?
there right now?
Well, it's still there right now.
Yes.
It's not in immediate danger, but I think that there is a considerable concern because the fence is rusting at this point. So you wouldn't want a child leaning against it and having it fall into the
To
river.
clarify, you mean all the locks that are spreading all the
The-
way?
The locks that are there, I'm not sure exactly how many pieces they plan to remove. But if it is a piece of public art, then what should be done with it, I think is the other question. And then the other question inherent in that, and that's what the council was asking, is it reasonable then to I guess, respond to the request from Seacoast Rep. Seacoast Rep asked to have the piece given to them to use in a play or to install on their property with public access? Or alternatively, would you recommend something else like a loan while the piece is being, while a more permanent place is being designed for the piece? So I guess, there's a lot there. It's not something that the city is urgently needing to address. They don't need to address it in the next few weeks, but I think they want to address it in the next few months. So that's a heads up. It's not an unlimited timeframe.
So, I mean, you said really, I guess it's a silly, that we don't know how far, I mean, they're proliferating.
Yeah.
So where do they stop? Where do they stop? Say, okay, then like,
A walk.
we only want these portions of it, but the part that's proliferating down ways, you know, is that kind of part of what they want to talk about? And are they also talking about how to mitigate it? So, you know, like you take it down and then 2 years later, there's some more love blocks.
Yeah, I think that the goal is to remove the pieces that are clearly getting very heavy. And
But that's
are
because they've been
damaged.
there for.
Right, they've been there for a long time. I think that's 1 or 2 fence segments. I don't think it extends much further. The segments that don't have a significant number of locks on them, I do not know what the city's plan is to address that, but it's not, those are currently, my understanding, those weren't in the immediate plan to immediately remove them. So, but the city would probably be removing the locks
Yeah,
so that it's consistent.
so let's say they do decide to remove them and they still put a cyclone fence back up. We
Yeah,
know what's
yeah,
going to
someone's
happen.
Put more
Right.
on.
And I think that that's a conversation that they're having right now in Public Works.
Right.
So, because the long-term plan for the the Prescott Park master plan is not to have a chain link fence there.
That's right.
Right.
So, I
There will
think,
be no fence.
right, but we haven't gotten to the execution stage of that, of the master plan for
Right.
Prescott Park. So I think they're having a discussion about what can be put back right now.
Right.
But they don't want something that's dangerous for
Right.
children. So clearly.
And will somebody come, or will we have information between now and then about which segment they're talking about so that we could be
Yeah,
clear
we'll
about?
need
what-
some info.
I can ask and
Right.
have Sean
Yeah.
help me with that on that.
Yeah,
I walk by it every single morning and I can also just take some photos and send them to Sean.
Yeah.
yeah. Let me
I think-
know who you'd like to invite to the
Maybe
meeting
we
and
all
I'll,
should
I'll
make a
do
little
that.
field visit
Yeah.
there.
or what your
For
questions
the
are.
next meeting and sort
And
of.
not put a assuming.
I know we're at time. Can I ask you a question to the committee, my own education here? Is there a difference between a piece of art and a monument? Or is a monument automatically a piece of art?
I think there's writing on this, Sean. I
Yep.
think there is writing on this, which we should look up
Okay.
because I was thinking about that actually when Margot was talking. And, you know, I would think I can tell you in the Smithsonian work that we did for sculpture, the monuments were part of the sculpture. So they were a subset of the sculpture. That's how the Smithsonian defined it. I think we need to address that because again, in a city with a history background, you know, we need to think about that.
Right.
And this Lovelocks thing makes me also think of
Mhm.
when does something that is sort of created by the public become a piece of public art? I mean, I think we get some really interesting.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
I think you're right. We're gonna, if we take the fence down, put another fence, even temporarily, people are gonna put their locks there.
Right.
Can this fence section be part of a sculpture that is movable at some point in time? And maybe have another section in coverage, I think, and I've talked to people about the artist in England, Bansky, who goes around and paints these beautiful things on buildings. And I have a person who's now retired from teacher and an art teacher for many years. And it's like, so that is a valid question. What is art? Where does that line fall? But a monument, certainly, monument isn't built to deliver bread to the grocery store. Its purpose is to stimulate a conversation.
That's right.
It's kind of a metaphysical piece to remind us of history. And in that way, it's a narrative piece, which fits one of the categories in art, as a narrative piece. Monuments are narrative pieces, and therefore it is a piece of
Yeah.
art.
Or to Bob's point before, even though we look at them as realistic, there are metaphorical elements
Right,
to monuments that you can read in different ways,
right.
right? So.
Okay.
Okay.
To close the meeting. Our next meeting is August 30th. Move to adjourn.
Yes.
I think there's consensus.
Yeah.
Yeah, just that I got
We don't vote on that.
A lot of thinking.
Bob.
It is.
Thank you.
Wow.